Spring music. I always laugh when friends complain about city traffic and long for the peace and quiet of the country. They seem unaware of how raucous the bush can be. If I'm going to grump about noise, I'd like to include mowers, chainsaws, motorbikes, power drills, possums, bellbirds, wattlebirds, and any creature or machine that keeps me awake at night or gets me up at dawn. The country is never quiet. It might be a truism that spring is the time for lovers, but it's also very loud. Spring is when grass grows at a reckless rate and must be mowed before growing so tall only a slasher can control it. Spring is when branches collapse under the weight of blossom and need trimming with chainsaw and whippersnipper. Spring is when our neighbours decide to renovate and the air is filled with the irritating clamour of power saws and drills. I suppose I'm also equating noise with sex. Spring is when our local youths know a rush of testosterone and crisscross the roads outside our block in ear-splitting metal steeds. When nesting wattle and bellbirds are being stridently territorial, when our local possums leap onto the roof in hobnail boots as they woo their females, and when bush rats scuttle up and down the vines that have self-seeded on the side of the building. Certainly, since this village has become more heavily populated, our peaceful evenings are often shattered by amplified music coming from some of the neighbours and the local camping site. Nor am I in love with the bellbirds as they fly between the topmost branches of our eucalypts. Highly territorial, their incessant and piercing cry has finally managed to send all our wrens and butcher birds to quieter blocks. Certain noises, however, are most welcome, such as the music our magpies make carolling to each other, and the gentle swish of wind through our trees. Spring is also the time for king tides, and sometimes when the wind blows our way, we hear waves moving onto the shore and back. Now that is certainly music to your ears. Walking. One of my greatest pleasures is exploring the roads, lanes and hidden bush tracks of our coastal village. Most are familiar and dear to me. I recognise any change to a building, or when a tree is cut down, or when a shrub flowers or wilts. Sometimes there's a surprise, as when something newly planted appears, or the frame of a new building suddenly happens. When an area has been lived in for as long as I have, some 28 years, there's time enough and plenty to muse over any change, whether it be for better or worse. What most strikes me as I stroll through this familiar territory is how gentrified it has become, and yet at the same time how it has managed to retain a certain individuality. One of the main reasons for this is that covenants regarding height have been imposed on many areas, and though some trees have outgrown those rules, mostly these laws have been carefully followed. The other, I guess, is that similar kinds of people are attracted to such a quiet place that at present doesn't even boast a local store that has just managed to hang on to a tiny post office and where there's still enough rain to keep gardens pristine. Unfortunately, this means that our population tends to be an ageing one, and just so we can keep the rigours of time in the forefront of our elderly brains, the nursing home at the corner of one of our major streets has just expanded to triple its original size. I tend to view this as somewhat similar to the stained glass windows of a 13th century cathedral, where the wicked are pictured being punished in horrid ways for their lives of sin. Surely there's a lesson here. I read it that if this village doesn't exercise its brains and bodies sufficiently, we could easily end up in that nursing home. So I take heed of those medieval warnings as I stride around the neighbourhood trying to memorise each lane, bush track and garden I pass. Wild ducks in the city. Because some of the time I live in a high-rise apartment, our balcony is often visited by pigeons, spiders, and the occasional cockatoo. But the other day I came outside to find 4 young people gathered in our backyard watching a wild duck. When they stood aside, I saw the mother duck was being followed by 9 identical, fluffy, yellow and brown ducklings, all imprinted so successfully they followed their mother's every move. However, it was obvious that Mother Duck had made a grave mistake nesting in our backyard. Now she was stuck behind a bicycle shed. Beyond lay a series of fences, houses and roads. Now she couldn't get her family through to Albert Park Lake. While our young helpers were trying to guide her out from behind the shed, poor Mother was getting into more and more of both a literal and figurative flap. Then one of the youngsters had the bright idea of placing her and her babies inside a cardboard carton and carrying the family to the lake. Certainly, if Mother and Ducklings tried to negotiate the area between our backyard and the lake, the family's survival chances were slim. Easy enough to catch the 9 chattering ducklings and place them inside a carton, but Mama objected fiercely to being captured. She flapped about and refused to join her babies. All this time, the ducklings kept up an endless squawk. The only solution was to hold the box low enough for Mum to hear them and thus lead her the kilometre or so to the lake. The last we saw of the duck family, they were nestled on a mud patch in the bushes beside the water. When we went back a little later to see if they were okay, they'd disappeared. There are safe islands in the middle of this lake where swans and water birds are safe from marauding dogs and cats. We can only hope that somehow the mother duck found her way there. We had no doubt that her babies will have followed her. In spite of many doomsayers, it once again proved how successfully some wild animals have adapted to our urban sprawl. But in this case, with just a little help from human friends.